Okay, this is my August 29th update for the garden this year. I apologize for the sound of the wind in the background. It's very windy today. And by this point in the season, about half the plants, the squash plants, have already died due to powdery mildew. Right here is the powdery mildew on the plants. Thankfully, my pumpkin right here is still developing. I had to pull out most of the mandan squash plants because they had already died. Over here, notice completely bare. I had to pull out a lot of the squash plants because they had died, and along with some infected leaves. Here, of course, are the volunteer tomatoes that sprouted up, and corn. I'm actually noticing some beans on this corn as well as the other beans plants on the sunflowers. You can see the bean pods there. It's still not time to pick the popcorn yet. Need to wait for the husk to turn yellow. And I'll show you the other bed now. This is the seed squash for my homeskusa that I've been showing every week. And it's getting closer and closer to time to harvest. I still need to wait a couple weeks before the skin is sufficiently firm. It still gets punctured when I put my fingernail on it. And if you notice, the vine where it's on is starting to die. The leaves are getting droopy. I've still been able to harvest squash from the other plants. I should have a couple, one right there, and one right here. I can harvest in a couple days. Unfortunately, one thing I found out, either there are 3 generations of squash vine borers where I live, or there are 2 generations, and the generation I had seen earlier in the year was actually the first generation. I found what looks like a larva hole for a squash vine borer right here due to the frass and the sawdust-like powder here. Unfortunately, that doesn't kill this one seed squash I got from the vining yellow crookneck. I'll keep an eye on this, and hopefully this plant goes to seed before it dies from squash vine borer damage. Right here, of course, the homeskusa is still doing well. As for the yellow crookneck, there's this flower here. It looks like it's about to rot off. I see a tiny flower up further up the stem, though. It's getting late in the year, though. I hope I get another fruit for this plant so I get some seeds. If not, I could still plant some more from the population I got from esoteric agriculture. As for the corn here, it's actually doing pretty well. It's not weak and yellow and sickly like it was earlier in the year. Maybe the has something to do with the urine. And also interesting, a lot of the bean vines are recovering from the bean beetle damage earlier in the year. Maybe I might actually get some beans from these vines here. Oh, time will tell. Over here is the bed where I planted some mustard and radish greens. And it looks like some kind of squirrel keeps digging up the seeds and planting nuts in the ground. I've had that problem where I live on my regular garden. Maybe if any people who's watching this has an idea how to deter squirrels, let me know. I've been putting the diluted urine on the plants to encourage growth. Seems to be working so far, but it doesn't get rid of squirrels. Here are the carrot plants. The Pusa Sita and the Black Nebula should be ready to harvest in about a month from now. The early scarlet corn is of course smaller than the Pusa Sita and may be very small by the time I pull it up. And of course here are the other carrots in the back row. This bed and piling it up on the carrots and applying some fertilizer. Now let's move on to the other bed. And here are the beans growing underneath the sunflowers. They are thankfully producing pods that I can use. They are not dry yet. I'm keeping an eye on them. And I'll be picking the pods as soon as they dry out. Well, as for these sunflowers, although I didn't plant the sunflowers as I mentioned previously, I am noticing, because the heads are nearly horizontal when they hang over, that my neighbor won't be likely to get very many goldfinches or chickadees eating the seeds. Good news is there are smaller sunflowers here that might still be attractive to birds. Now, of course, if you're raising sunflowers for snacking, it's not really good to have the bird eating the harvest before you harvest it. Best case scenario, my neighbor could just go ahead and pick the seeds out of the head and put them in the bird feeder. Anyway, let's move on to the bed with the other stuff. Last bed. This garden bed, I'm noticing the either they're mung beans or cowpeas. I'm having some that are turning brown that I can pick off in a couple days. Maybe then I can find out for certain what these things are. This one I can actually pull off today. And they are very healthy, which is good news. As for the other beans here, the Cherokee pool bean and the other beans are flowering, but I don't see any fruits. Now, I do see a few flowers on these other bean vines, but the pods aren't very noticeable yet. They're still tiny. So we'll find out. Hopefully I get some beans this year from these plants. In the meantime, here's some baby chili pepper plants. I've got a couple peppers here. They're not turning red yet, unfortunately. I will pick them when that happens. And over here on the other side, here are the tomatoes. They look like Rona tomatoes, I think. Thankfully, no signs of blossom end rot. I will pick these and maybe create a dish from them when they're ready to harvest. Right here is the horizontal bush, and unfortunately, I still don't see any flowers here. I wonder why. It better flower before the frost hits, so I get some seeds for next year. And of course, here are the few amaranth plants that survived. They're sticking in there, just barely anything. Well, let's move on to the mustard plants over here. So the black mustard plants I used in the black mustard plants I used in the previous video where I made the sauteed zucchini dish. There are signs of flea beetle damage, but the plants are still relatively healthy. Here the lettuce is emerging. I'm hoping the plants don't bolt before I can harvest any leaves. Anyway, we'll find out how things go in the next few weeks.